Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says, powered by Design 2147, New York City Expediting Company. I'm here today with Kimberly Murphy. Kimberly, great to have you on board.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, usually we start the show off about a little bit about relationships because I'm all about relationships. And today you reminded me how long I've been in business, working with your firm. Back in 2001, your firm partnered with a dear friend of ours, Joe Sultan. Yep. And since then, we have basically worked on probably about 90% of your work.
That's right.
And your firm is one of my favorites.
Great. Good to hear.
And that being that I don't think that you can go to a firm where every person that you call or speak to on the phone is not polite and professional.
Nice.
Your office does an incredible job. Plus the fact that you work on very, very complex projects related to affordable housing and education, which, again, are two of my favorite types of architecture because you provide housing for people that are in need. So, one of the reasons I asked you to come on the show is to talk a little bit about affordable housing. But before we get there, you and I struck up a great conversation before the show about, the phenomenon today of Barbie. And Barbie in 2011, I believe, as the career woman in architecture. So tell us a little bit about. You brought this up, and I want to get your take on it.
Yeah, I did bring it up. I mean, I think, look, Barbie's everywhere right now, and I'm so happy that she is because she's basically the reason I'm an architect.
Wow.
Yeah, no joke. So, when I was very little, I loved Barbie. She was my favorite toy. But I loved making her homes. I loved drawing floor plans for her. I loved building out of shoe boxes, different rooms. I would take books and stack them up and make stairs. I loved the promenade of a Barbie getting dressed up and walking down the stairs. That was just, that was my childhood.
Wow.
And someone said to me that that's what an architect does. And I thought, then that's what I'm going to do.
That's great.
So I think, I drew floor plans and I built cardboard houses and that was great. So I think Barbie's been kind of in the background for a long time for me. And, the Barbie architect doll came out in 2011.
I did some research on it, 2011, and it was sponsored by an architect who, through Mattel, at the AIA.
It's great.
It was through the AIA that they created this Barbie for women in architecture. And I was amazed by it, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
So when you told me about that, it's funny how we look back at our childhood and understand, how we got into architecture. And with me, it was through a personal friend who, inspired me. He went to Cooper Union, and from when I was like 8 or 9 years old, I wanted to be an architect.
Yeah.
And I didn't pursue my full field in architecture, but I pursue it every day in a different way.
In a different way.
Right. So that's great. So we have cool. Kimberly Murphy and Barbie, and that's a great connection.
Yeah, and I will say that another, Barbie struck home with a lot of us, and I will say the scene where have you seen it?
No. Not yet. My wife has been trying
to... Stop the filming. We have to go see Barbie. There's a scene when Barbie and Ken come from Barbie world to the real world, and they're in Venice Beach, and they're, Barbie suddenly feels very self-conscious of her surroundings and her body, and she says to Ken, I need some good feminine energy. There's a construction site. Let's go over there. There's no better place to get like really strong feminine energy than a construction site. So, that's a joke, but to me, I've had some really great construction sites that were very much full of positive energy. So I both love and hate that scene, but I love it because I have had the opportunity in a field that
have that connection.
So male-dominated that there are so many great projects that are funded by women, that are detailed and designed by women. I mean, I'm still to date sometimes asked if am I there to take the notes? Am I there to pick the colors? And I'm there to do all of that and the zoning and the roofing details and the whole 9 yards. So I do think 100%. The Barbie movie gives us a little bit of, those in us in the construction field, we can sink our teeth into that. 100%. That feels good.
And having said that, my experience is going to a construction trailer, and 37 years ago, giving away my time in this business, there were very few women in the construction trailer. And today, that's much different.
Much different.
Much different. And I don't mean a receptionist. I mean
running the jobs.
she's running the project.
That's right.
And and I think it's awesome. I think
great.
it's wonderful. I think that everyone should get a fair share to do any dream that they have, whatever profession they have, and whatever occupation they want to chase. It's up to them. It shouldn't be up to someone else to decide who and what can do what.
That's right. It makes our field more rich. It represents the cultures and the communities that we work in.
100%.
And it, I remember working with Judy Edelman, who was the founder of our firm. And I said, Judy, I'm not a woman architect. I'm just an architect, And she said, stop that right now, because we all bring our sensibilities. We all bring our interests and our passions to this field of construction.
That's what makes us all different, right?
Right. Our inspirations are all different, and we all bring something a little special to the table.
Well, that's great. Yeah. So a big part of your business that we share with you and a lot of the developers here in New York is the 100% affordable.
100% affordable, supportive. That's right.
And that is one of my, if not my favorite, because I think that when the projects are done, just like education, we were at the Marymount ribbon cutting the other day, and it was uplifting to see how hard people work to get the funding, to give children a better place to get education. So to me, education and affordable housing have a very similar thing, that it's part of what we do, but there's also an incredible sense of accomplishment, that when you're done, you turn over this building, and a family that didn't have an apartment now has an apartment. Yeah. A senior person who's in a really bad situation gets a brand new place to live, and gives the whole community a sense of accomplishment. Yeah. And a lot of the sites that I've gone to with your projects through the contractors were abandoned sites that were community eyesores. So,
that's right.
Right now we face a lot of difficulty with the 421A because the developers aren't giving, back 20% of their buildings to affordable. And also, it's hard to get funding,
It's hard to get funding, and the funding can change midstream. So, you're trying to deliver a certain number of units, you're trying to hit deadlines and keep costs where they need to be. Sometimes mid-development, a client or a development team needs to switch streams.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? They may jump from HPD to HCR. They may decide that they're going to bring in an Article 28. Like, there's so many different complex ways of developing these projects. And I'm not the money person, but each of those funding streams has their design requirements.
And what's it, I was at one of the seminars for BizNow, and a gentleman spoke about he called it a journey. He said, we get access to a site, a person wants to sell us the site, we then go through all this paperwork about how to fund it, when they can get out, when we can get in. He said, it looks great that, you look on LinkedIn and it says, oh, we're starting our project. He goes, it took us 5 years to get there. He goes, it's amazing. He goes, between all the approvals, between the government, between, New York State, between the federal government, everyone's saying, oh, you're going to get the funding. It's not like you just walk somewhere and someone writes you a check for $30 million.
That's right. It's complex. There's zoning changes that need to be made to make the project feasible.
Right.
And the community needs to be behind it. There are a huge number of obstacles.
Right.
But, as Oprah says, I don't think those obstacles are in the way of the path. They are the path.
They are the path.
So we just keep going. And when you're doing the mission-driven work, which is what you're talking about, that's just part of the recipe. It's part of the sauce.
It is, and I think that right now in the press, all we hear about is that every every month we're 10,000 more apartments
Right.
behind.
Yep.
There's no 421A.
Yep.
They're asking, you know, a big part of my show is about office to residential conversion.
I love that.
And yet, you know, we have codes, because that's what we do here at
do.
Design.
We follow
that
the
are-
law.
Right, that are antiquated, you know,
Yep.
and they haven't been updated to meet this housing crisis,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and if anything, Design as a company, we are pro-law. We're pro-zoning. We believe
Absolutely.
that the laws are what makes architecture great. Not
right.
for besides the people that live in it, the people that live next to it, the people that work in it, the people that travel to it. Every one of those aspects is important. And yet, I guess, you know, I read and read and read about all these housing issues, and yet I see it from the other side with firms like your firm and
Yeah.
others, that path to get, and I don't say just 30 apartments. Every apartment is critical. If it's one, it's important.
Yeah.
Forget about 250. But when you're trying to get 10 apartments or 30 apartments on a small site up in the Bronx, and it takes years.
Right.
It's to me, it's just so frustrating to see that. I wish there was a path that it could be a little bit more accelerated, that because 30 families are in need now.
Right. Right. I think that our clients, the nonprofit world, everybody's getting creative. Right? It has to do with the funding. It has to do with the sites. The sites are moving further and further out of the 5 boroughs, right? Which you've talked about on your show, and we've done some projects in Yonkers,
Right.
And
Long Island, everywhere.
yeah, you know, you follow where the housing can happen, and an important part of that is the community, right? So when you're taking families, they need to be in a community where there are services, right?
Correct.
So it's really important that the development, if it's 100 units or 30 units, that there are
there's support.
services, that there's
Right.
support for those. So I think it's all about getting a little creative with how you partner on a project. What's the
Right.
funding, and what can you do with the stock? What's available?
Well, and you know, it was
on
funny
site.
that one of the things that through this podcast, I've realized how powerful non-for-profits, developers, and the government can partner to create great things.
Amazing.
However, it's the time that it takes, right? So,
Yeah.
Ashley from Capolino's office was on,
Yep, I
and
saw
and
that.
and we had it was just a wonderful podcast about time, that things get put in motion, but through government, it has to go through the channels, which I understand, because anything that's done quickly is usually bad,
right.
Anything
That's
that's a knee-jerk reaction is usually not very good,
Yeah.
and it doesn't meet everything. But, you know, we talked about office to residential conversion, and part of the conversation was that if you bring all these units into Midtown, where do the children go to school?
That's right.
Where is the supermarket? Where is the, you know, it's not just, oh, okay, we need apartments. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
But you also have to think as an architect and as a planner, as a city planner,
right.
that where is the infrastructure for these people to have a good community,
quality of life,
right?
A strong community. And I will say, one of the things, you know, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Kansas, and I've been here for 20-something years. I would consider moving to another city if it provided for its communities the way New York City provides for its communities, right?
Right.
I think New York City really can support a variety of populations.
Without a doubt. And
Right.
it's always been that way.
Always been that way. And I think that is so special that our city and our planners are committed to having diverse communities and having populations that can live together. And one
No
of my
doubt.
favorite projects that we did with you guys was our Cortelli Road project, Baptist Church of the Redeemer. And this is one of these projects that is so near and dear to our heart because it took 8 years
Right.
minimum. And what is great about that project is that was one of the first that got through the zoning of a blended affordable, supportive, and heirs. So heirs is senior housing.
Wow.
Right?
That's great. Oh, I remember this. Yes.
This was years ago. This was years ago.
Yeah,
years
but I
ago.
remember the project now.
And our zoning diagrams, I think, that we did with you guys, served as a little bit of a precedent for other projects. But that idea of having these populations of, formerly homeless people who have experienced homelessness with seniors and families.
And mixing it all together.
I mean, how much more New York can you get than that,
You
right?
can't.
So I think that's such a special thing that our city and our planners have to keep eye on the prize. And, you're trained as an architect and you went one direction. I've stayed a little traditional in my field. But architects go and do all kinds of things. I would love to see more architects in government. I think that would be tremendous, and architecture education is it's a great thing. It's a great way to spend your time.
It is.
Critical thinking, there's a lot.
And
problem solving.
Architects in general, if you make a decision to go into the architecture program, you need to be committed and dedicated because it is a lot of work. It's not a lot of work. It's not a lot of schoolwork, right? As I would say to my children, but it's a lot of creative work. And creative work takes time. Ideas take time to organically grow and mature and become something. So, whenever I look back now and, we talk about being an architect and not being an architect, and I could remember, my dad saying to me, you're going to be an architect. Why do you want to get permits? And I said, Dad, because I can touch hundreds of buildings, not just one.
Yeah.
So to me, I drive around with my kids and the running joke is every time we're in Manhattan, we go see a show or we go out to dinner and the kids will go, I know, Dad, you worked on that building, right?
My kids do the same thing.
Right.
My kids are so sick of me saying, there's Landing Road, there's this,
Right.
they're like, we know already.
But we're so proud of what we do.
Yeah, it's great.
And it's great to do the condo jobs because they're fun and they're beautiful. But honestly, when you get to the end of these community type projects and supportive projects, there is a different sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
And one of our biggest things that happen at design is at the end of affordable projects and supportive housing, there's a lot of frustration from everyone.
Yeah.
And the reason that is that I want to share that is that they took 7 years to get a project off. They finally are getting to the end. They see the product. They see it. They can feel it. They can walk it. They can smell it's all new. And then, you don't have this piece of paper. We can't give you a TCO.
That's right.
Oh, this contract never put in this. We have to be the bearer of bad news a lot of times to tell them that, I know you want to move in here, but the sidewalk's not done. The city's not going to let you move. And I can understand their frustration. Like, well, what do you mean? Why can't we just do this? We need to move these people in.
Yeah.
And my heart goes out to them.
That's right.
Because they've spent so much money, they put so much effort in, and at the very last minute, when they can finally see it, feel it, walk it, touch it, they can't move in.
That's right. Well, I mean, I think housing is like educational in a way, right? So when you're doing a new school building, it revolves around that September date.
Right, regardless.
Right? TCO is in April. You go backwards, right? Because those kids
we've
have
done
to get
hundreds
in.
of them for the
that
SCA.
panic. You know that panic. You know how the fire alarm. You know what it feels like.
Right, and you know that expectation.
That's right. And housing is starting to get that way too because it's about the funding cycle and how they meet their requirements, and they've got to lease up the buildings, right? So it takes a lot of effort to lease up the buildings and get all the applicants with their information correct.
And I also think that the supportive housing has gotten very creative, that on a lot of the buildings that we're doing that are on the larger side, they've actually leased some space back to the SCA to put a school.
That's great.
Within, we're doing one in Brooklyn right now, which they gave some of that space. Another one, they had some space on the first floor. They made it into a daycare because they realized that these are families that need that supportiveness. And I think that even the sponsors of these buildings are starting to recognize that it's not just about the apartments. They're also thinking ahead to say, okay, this not only works for us financially, but it also works for the community, for the people that are using the building. I go back to my buildings that I did with Joe Sultan back in the day where we had SROs, but the whole first floor was all about counseling. It was all about helping.
Right.
It was about finding them a permanent home that they could buy.
Yeah.
That they got all of that in one building.
Right. There's housing support spaces for the residents. And like you said, the clients are trying to get residents into the apartments out of shelter.
Correct.
Right? So out of subpar conditions,
Oh.
they're actually moving in. I've walked through a lot of our projects over the last 20 years, and for a woman to walk in first time, woman who's experienced justice and incarceration, moving into her home, her first home with her children, where she has a 2-bedroom apartment for her and her children.
It's amazing.
Looking and at her kitchen and seeing a microwave that was built into the millwork, just crying.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the moments where
Well, that's
I'm
where
done. I will do this all day, every day.
For 7 years,
I'm done.
The 7 years that it took you to get to that point
is minutes, because when you see the impact, it's 100% worth it. So that's why working with the mission-driven organizations has been extraordinarily challenging and rewarding at the same time.
Exactly.
So we keep going. We keep doing it.
So as we go back and we look back at where supportive housing started, when I was doing it in the 90s and where we are today at 2023 going into 2024, one of the things that we're hearing is that although they're talking a lot about it, the funding is still difficult.
The funding is still difficult. There's several ways, there's several paths to securing funding for supportive housing, and like I said, I'm not the money person, but we do know that the different routes have different design requirements.
Correct.
And that's what gets complicated. And when we work with your team, it's all about the law. It's about the code, really. And are you meeting the minimums of this, and this? Okay, but is the code requirement there? What is the most restrictive?
I know we've been working on a project with your office where, it sounds like this great idea that someone gives a piece of property, right? Could be NYCHA, could be, anyone else, right?
Yep.
And they give because we've been doing a lot of senior housing on the NYCHA sites, right? And they give this piece of property and then we dive into it and we're like, oh my God, we can't get all the apartments because we don't have egress. Oh, we can go through the side yard. But the side yard's an easement. Are we allowed to be in it?
That's right.
And it looks easy that, okay, it's 50 by 100 lot or it's 100 by 100. And then you dive into it and you realize how difficult it really is.
Right.
And sometimes, architects will say to us, well, we could put we'll say to them, well, we could put a corridor here. And they're like, sister, you don't understand. Every square foot is huge to these people.
Every inch counts. The size of our partitions count.
Right.
If I use a 3 5/8 inch stud versus a 2 1/2 inch stud, that makes a difference.
Right.
So it comes down to inches, and we hate that has to be. And in our office, we're always trying to fight for a little more tolerance so that we don't have these panics in construction. But if that's the difference between a unit and a not a unit, then the conversation's over.
Well, I have a little bit of a tough question because I don't ever like to spring a question on the guests. But local law 97 is a big issue.
Yeah.
And one of the places that I feel from all the seminars that I go to that I'm really concerned with is supportive housing.
It's a big lift.
It's a big lift.
Yes.
It's a big lift to and I don't know what kind of exemptions, or are they going to change some of the exemptions, because I personally think that if the bigger projects have to comply, they're going to take a lot of money away from the places that people need it, whether it's in the services or it's in the future construction. So tell us a little bit about some of the studies that your firm is doing to help these non-for-profits.
Well, what I will say is that a lot of our non-for-profits are already looking at this. They're looking at how their operations can be impacted or benefited from increased resilience and energy compliant design. They're looking at replacing windows and upgrading roofs. They're already doing so much that when it comes to doing the analysis, it's going to be good. I think a lot of them want to do the right thing. There have to be support supportive financing for them.
Correct.
And I think they
'Cause
can't be penalized like all the others are going to be penalized, right? So
that's my point. So if you're going
they
to penalize
just
them, and
can't.
they just can't because
Yeah,
then we're
that's
going
right.
to be we're defeating the whole purpose of having it. Is because we're supposed to be helping and supporting, not making it more difficult for the next group.
Right. I do think that the nonprofits and they don't have a large facilities group a lot of time, right? Because that's a lot of cost.
And they also don't have a slush fund.
They don't.
They're barely making it
right,
through the
right. But they are committed. They have standards they have to uphold. So some of them are actually doing better than you might think.
Oh, that's great.
Because they have to prioritize it to meet their programs if they're funding from the state
or
from
from the federal government.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, that's
so a little bit like when I go
that
into
eases
projects,
my mind a little
it
bit.
does.
Thank
you know,
you.
it's like we look at quality of light fixtures or quality of toilet fixtures. Sometimes we can't always get what we specify because of supply chain or cost. A lot of our nonprofit clients, they'll go ahead and buy or put the money in and hold off on value engineering out these lights because they don't really have the ability to change them out all the time. So let's get the higher quality light fixture.
Right.
And what's worse
So they're
than
more proactive than
That's
inactive.
right. And what's worse than walking into a corridor where half the lights are out?
Right.
Or the lights have
'Cause then we're back-
been installed with
right.
like different temperatures of fixtures, right? Like they won't do it. And so it feels better. If you're doing affordable housing, you're doing supportive, you don't want a corridor that feels like affordable housing.
Right, exactly.
Right?
So the whole
just
concept
a little
is-
more
right.
care into some of those selections, I think is really important. And it helps the space have longevity as well.
I do too. So as we get towards the end of this, I always have the same question. Andrew Peters from Curry and Brown, who's a cost estimator, a dear friend of mine, was on the show, and he had a great saying, which I love, which is, too many people look in the rearview mirror instead of looking forward. And his job as an estimator is always to look forward. Someone comes to him today and says, hey, I want to build this in 3 years from now. And you go, okay. And he's got to figure out how he's going to be as accurate as possible to forecast what something will cost at that moment, right?
That's right.
But what I love about his saying and the way he perceives it is, I love to ask my guests what they predict, and it's a prediction and an opinion, of where we're going to see supportive housing in the next year. I think that it gives us a lot of hope, because I think that most architects and most people that have been on my show are very optimistic. And I want to hear your sense of hope for the audience about giving people a great place to live in the near future that currently right now probably don't have one.
Wow, great question. I wish I had the crystal ball, but I think we're getting creative in this field. And I think that the funding, the sites, it's all about the creative. It's the partnerships.
Correct.
It's integrating maybe a clinic. It's finding community facility spaces within their development that they can give back to the community. It's putting a face towards the community that is embracing and hopeful.
So are you? So not to cut you off, but
Yeah.
So are you saying that the supportive housing has evolved compared to where it was just a straight apartment building with a little bit of social services within the building or community services, where now they're looking at a different type of building and a different way to get the funding and partner with other developers to do this in a different way?
That's right. I think you're looking at supportive housing that's blended with affordable housing. So you've got those families, right? I see a lot more 3-bedroom apartments needing to be included in some of these developments, family apartments, fewer 1-bedrooms.
Right.
And then you've got the efficiencies. Right. So I see that we're looking at communities. We're looking at these developments, these buildings.
So it's not the prototypical little efficiency.
It's not 200 studio units anymore. Right? That's like a warehouse.
Right.
There's no more of that. I see in the next
quality.
year. I see in the next year that we are going to make communities really happy. And I think that the communities are going to see these larger developments, 200 units and plus. They're going to have a beautiful mix of amenities which I know you've talked about on the show, these amenities that are going to have kids' play spaces, they're
Right.
going to have gyms, there's going to be working spaces, but there's going to be 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and studios, along with those fantastic support spaces where they have housing specialists and clinical
Right.
people who are really helping
Right, trying
keep
jobs.
the domestic violence survivors.
Sure.
All of this is being supportive. And what I love about the supportive housing, they're not only going to work with that portion, that
It's the whole community.
that 40%.
Right.
They're going to work with everyone
With
in the
everybody,
building.
right.
They're going to serve all the families,
Correct.
right? So I really think you're going to see a lot of communities and this perception of what supportive and integrated housing is. I think you're going to see that people are going to really like what's coming down the pike. I think these buildings are really going to have,
Like I said,
massive community
I love
impact.
optimism.
Yeah.
New York City needs optimism. It's
great.
You know, and I think that's what keeps us coming in every day and working on these projects, and when they're done and you get to see, you know, a family move into a building like that and know that you were part of that. You know, one of my favorite lines is that I feel like my company and myself, we're part of the fabric of New York City.
Yeah.
And your firm has been part of that fabric for
Yeah.
a long time.
That's right.
Kimberly, it was awesome to
fun.
have you come in. I'm so glad you said yes to doing this.
It's a great
You're the
time.
first architect on the show. So thank you very much for
That's
taking your time
awesome.
out and spending some time with us. And again, the great part is that we look forward to having you come back and see if your prediction was right. But I do believe
it.
your prediction is right on.
Let's find
Thank
out.
you.
Thanks so much, Sisto.
You're welcome.